I followed my husband to a hidden apartment in the old quarter. Most wives would have kicked down the door or screamed. I just watched from the shadows and smiled. Julian calls himself a real estate tycoon, yet he made $1 billion error. He built his secret love nest on the one specific plot of land that I secretly own. My revenge began the moment he turned the key in that lock. My name is Alara Vance, and for the last 15 years, I have been the invisible woman standing in the shadow of a giant. I stood on the polished mahogany platform erected specially for the groundbreaking ceremony of Thorn Plaza. The salty wind of Silver Bay whipped against my face, carrying the scent of the ocean mixed with the acrid smell of fresh cement. Beside me, my husband, Julian Thorn, beamed at the sea of reporters and investors. He looked like the epitome of the American dream. He wore a bespoke Italian suit that cost more than my father made in a year, and his smile was a weapon of mass destruction designed to disarm zoning boards and skeptical city council members. Julian raised his hands to silence the applause. He spoke with that practiced baritone that used to make my knees weak. "We are not just building a shopping complex," Julian declared, his voice booming over the speakers. "We are preserving the soul of the old quarter. We are marrying the past with the future to create a legacy that will last for 100 years. I almost laughed. It took every ounce of my self-control to keep my face blank. Preserving the soul, Julian would pave over his own mother's grave if it meant adding another zero to his bank account. I shifted slightly in my shoes. I wore a dress the color of wet pavement, a dull gray shapeless thing that I knew made me look washed out next to him. That was the point. I was the librarian wife, the boring accessory that made Julian look grounded and family-oriented. My eyes drifted to the front row of the VIP section. There she was, Sierra. She was impossible to miss in a crimson dress that hugged curves she had clearly paid a surgeon to perfect. She was the lead architect on this project, or so the press release said. In reality, she was the reason Julian had started dyeing his graying hair and working out twice a day. She looked at him not like an employee looks at a boss, but like a predator looks at a meal she has already secured. Her eyes flickered to me for a split second, filled with a pitying arrogance. She thought she had won. Julian turned slightly, angling his body away from the cameras so only I could see his face. The charming smile did not reach his eyes. His eyes were cold, dead flints of onyx. "Ilara," he whispered, his voice low and venomous. "Stop slouching. You look pathetic. Remember, as soon as this ceremony is over, you go home and sign those papers. Do not make me destroy you publicly." I looked at him. 3 months ago. Those words would have shattered me. 3 months ago. I was the woman who tracked his car to a hidden apartment in the old quarter because I was worried he was working too hard. I remembered standing across the street, watching through my binoculars as they drank wine in a penthouse built inside a building that was supposed to be condemned. I remembered the layout on their table. I remembered realizing that my husband was not just a cheater, but a fraud. But today, I did not feel fear. I felt the heavy weight of the leather bag in my hand. It did not contain the divorce papers he had drafted to leave me with nothing. It contained a brittle, yellowing file from the city archives. "And now," the master of ceremonies announced, "Mr. Thorn will cut the ribbon." Julian reached for the golden scissors. This was it. The moment he cemented his victory, I stepped forward. It was not in the script. Julian froze, his hand hovering over the red ribbon. He shot me a look of pure panic masked as concern. He likely thought I was going to beg him to stay, or perhaps thank him for his generosity. I walked past him to the podium. The microphone screeched slightly as I adjusted it. The crowd fell silent. Sierra frowned in the front row, her red lips parting in confusion. I looked out at the hundreds of faces. Then I turned and looked directly at Julian. "My husband. He speaks so beautifully about history," I said, my voice steady and clear, amplifying across the construction site. But I have a question for everyone here today. I paused. Julian took a step toward me, his jaw tight. Julian, I said into the mic, smiling a smile that did not reach my eyes. Do you actually know who owns the ground you are standing on right now? 15 years ago, I was invisible in a different way. I was not the trophy wife standing on a podium. I was a 24-year-old archivist buried in the basement of the City History Museum. While other girls my age were out drinking cocktails at the pier, I was inhaling the scent of decaying paper and studying land deeds from the 19th century. My family never had money. The Vances were cash poor, but we were the unofficial keepers of history in Silver Bay. We knew where the property lines were drawn before the fires of 1920 changed the city layout. We held the knowledge of zoning laws that had long been forgotten by the bureaucrats in City Hall. That was what drew Julian to me. Back then, Julian Thorne was not a tycoon. He was a small-time contractor with cheap shoes, a desperate ambition, and absolutely no capital. He did not have the connections to get the lucrative permits, and he did not have the money to bribe the right officials. He met me when he came to the library looking for a way to contest a zoning restriction on a small lot he had bought with borrowed money. He did not fall in love with my laugh or my eyes. He fell in love with the way I could navigate the labyrinth of city ordinances. I remember the night he realized my value. We were alone in the archives, surrounded by stacks of dusty ledgers. I showed him a loophole in a colonial charter that would allow him to build 3 stories higher than the current law permitted. He looked at me with an intensity that I mistook for passion. He grabbed my hands, his grip tight and trembling. "Alara, do you realize what you just did?" he whispered, his eyes wide. "You just made me. You just made us $1 million. I can't do this without you. I need you. I was young and naive. I thought he meant he needed me as a partner, as a soulmate. I did not realize he meant he needed me as a tool." Our courtship was a series of strategy sessions disguised as dates. We did not go to movies. We sat on the floor of my small apartment, spreading out blueprints while he talked about building a future. He sold me a dream where we built the city together. I used my skills to help him win his first major bid, the Riverside Project. I wrote the proposal. I found the historical precedent that allowed him to bypass the environmental impact fee. When he won, he attributed the success to his business acumen. I stayed quiet, happy just to be part of his rise. When we got married, it was a small civil ceremony. Julian insisted on it. "We need to save every penny to invest back into the company," he told me, holding my face in his hands. "You don't need a big white dress to know I love you." "Right?" I nodded, blinded by love. Then came the prenuptial agreement. He presented it to me 2 days before the wedding, smiling that charming, boyish smile. "It is just standard procedure. Ilara," he said, sliding the pen toward me. "My investors. They get nervous. This just protects the company assets. It protects us both, in case the market crashes." I signed it without reading the fine print. I thought marriage was about trust. I did not know that Julian defined trust as total submission. During those early years, while Julian was busy chasing investors, I made a small investment of my own. I found a listing for the Old Quarter Trust. It was a bundle of deeds for several dilapidated buildings in the historic district, properties that were considered liabilities because of the strict preservation laws. No one wanted them. The city was practically giving them away to anyone willing to take on the maintenance responsibilities. I used the small inheritance my grandmother left me to buy the management rights. It cost me less than $5,000. When I told Julian, he laughed in my face. "Why would you buy that junk?" he asked, shaking his head as he poured himself a drink. "It is just rotting wood and rat droppings. You are wasting your money on nostalgia. Alara, leave the real estate to the men who know how to turn a profit." He never asked to see the paperwork. He never asked which specific buildings were included in the trust. He thought it was just a cute, useless hobby for his boring librarian wife. That was the first mistake of many that would eventually lead to his destruction. Money changes people. but not in the way they tell you in fairy tales. It does not just make them dress better or eat finer food. It acts like a slow-acting poison that eats away at their conscience until nothing is left but appetite. As the years blurred together, Julian transformed from the ambitious young contractor into the untouchable CEO of the Thorn Group. I transformed too. I faded from being his partner into being a piece of furniture in his mansion, a boring housewife who was useful for photo ops but useless for conversation. He started vanishing. At first, it was legitimate business trips to the capital. Then, the trips became frequent, vague, and unexplained. He changed the passcode on his phone, claiming it was for corporate security. When I tried to talk to him about my preservation work at the museum, he would roll his eyes and turn up the volume on the television. "Ilara, please," he would say, waving his hand dismissively. "Nobody cares about those dusty old buildings. Real estate is about the future, not worshiping the past." The isolation was suffocating. At the gala dinners hosted in our ballroom, I stood by the shrimp tower while Julian charmed investors. That was where I first saw Sierra. She was everything I was not. She was a 25-year-old architect with a degree from a prestigious university and a philosophy that matched Julian's greed. She preached that the old city needed to be leveled to make way for glass and steel. Julian looked at her like she was a prophet. "Sierra has vision, Ilara," Julian told me one night after a party, loosening his tie. "She understands that you have to destroy to create. You could learn a thing or two from her, instead of burying your nose in those old maps." I said nothing. I had learned that silence was safer than argument, but silence allows you to hear things others miss. A week later, I was walking past his home office late at night. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar. I heard his voice, low and urgent. "I do not care how you do it. Just move the liquid assets," Julian was saying. "Create another shell company if you have to. By the time I serve her the papers, I want my net worth to look like zero. She gets nothing." My heart hammered against my ribs. He was not just leaving me. He was planning to rob me of the 15 years I had invested in his success. The next morning, I tried to ask him about his schedule for the week. He snapped at me, his face twisting into a mask of irritation. "Why are you always interrogating me?" he shouted, slamming his coffee cup down. "You are becoming paranoid, Ilara. It is pathetic. You sit in this big house all day imagining things because you have no life of your own. Maybe you need to see a therapist." He was gaslighting me. He wanted me to doubt my own reality so I would not see the knife he was sharpening for my back. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday. Julian adjusted his cufflinks in the mirror, avoiding my gaze. "I have to go to the north side suburbs," he said smoothly. "There is a potential site for a new warehouse. I will be late. Do not wait up." He kissed my cheek, cold and perfunctory, and walked out the door. I waited until I heard the engine of his luxury sedan fade down the driveway. Then, I went to the utility drawer in the kitchen and pulled out the tablet we use to track vehicle maintenance. I had installed a GPS tracker on his car 2 years ago, not to spy on him, but because the insurance company offered a discount for mileage tracking. He had completely forgotten it existed. I opened the app. The little blue dot representing his car was not heading north to the suburbs. It was moving south. It moved deeper into the city, winding through the narrow cobblestone streets of the old quarter. The dot stopped. I zoomed in on the map. He was parked on Harbor Street, right in the heart of the district he claimed to hate. I did not call him. I did not cry. A cold, hard resolve settled in my stomach. I went to the garage and bypassed the luxury SUV he bought me. Instead, I climbed into my old sedan, the one I had kept from before we were rich. I turned the key, and the engine sputtered to life. I backed out of the driveway and turned south, following the blue dot into the darkness. I parked my sedan 3 blocks away to ensure he would not spot the familiar headlights. The old quarter was a ghost town at this hour. The streetlights flickered with a sickly yellow buzz, illuminating the wet cobblestones that slicked the narrow alleys. This was the heart of the proposed Thorn Plaza development. Julian had told the board of directors that this area was a blighted wasteland overrun by rats and decay. I walked through the shadows, pulling my coat tighter against the damp chill. I found his car tucked into an alleyway behind a 4-story brick structure known locally as the Heritage House. The building looked abandoned from the street level. The windows on the first 3 floors were boarded up with plywood, and graffiti covered the crumbling brickwork. It was the perfect camouflage for a man who lived his life wearing a mask. I did not storm the front door. Instead, I retreated to the awning of a closed coffee shop across the street. The darkness was my friend. I waited. 10 minutes later, a taxi pulled up. Sierra stepped out. She did not look like she was visiting a construction site. She wore a trench coat over a cocktail dress and high heels that clicked sharply on the pavement. She walked straight to the side entrance of the derelict building. She did not knock. She pulled a key from her purse and unlocked the door with the familiarity of a woman coming home. My stomach twisted, but I forced the bile down. I looked up. The top floor, the attic level that was supposed to be structurally unsound, suddenly glowed with a soft, warm light. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn back just enough for me to see inside. Julian walked into the frame. He was holding 2 glasses of champagne. He handed one to Sierra, and she laughed, throwing her head back. Then he pulled her close, and they kissed. It was not a quick peck. It was a lingering, possessive kiss that spoke of a long-established intimacy. I reached into my bag. I did not pull out a tissue to wipe away tears because there were none. I pulled out my compact architectural binoculars. I used these for inspecting cornice details on cathedrals. But tonight, they served a grimmer purpose. I brought them to my eyes and adjusted the focus. The image sharpened. I could see the sweat on Julian's brow. I could see the crystal clarity of the champagne flutes. But then, my gaze shifted to the large oak table behind them. It was not just a romantic dinner. Spread out on the table was a massive, detailed architectural model. Even from this distance, I recognized the layout. It was the master plan for Thorn Plaza. I lowered the binoculars, my hands trembling not from sadness, but from rage. "Oh, Julian," I whispered to the empty street. You are so incredibly stupid." The building they were standing in, the Heritage House, was the cornerstone of his argument for demolition. He had stood before the city council just last week and swore under oath that this specific building was a public safety hazard and impossible to renovate. He claimed the foundation was rotted through and that it needed to be bulldozed immediately to save the city from a potential collapse. Yet, there he was, standing on a floor capable of supporting marble countertops and heavy furniture. The lights were on. The plumbing was clearly working. He had not just lied to me. He had renovated a building he claimed was condemned, using shareholder money to build a secret penthouse for his mistress, all while planning to demolish the surrounding history to boost his profit margins. He was not just an adulterer. He was a criminal. He was committing zoning fraud, perjury, and embezzlement. I looked through the lenses one last time. Julian was raising his glass in a toast, likely celebrating the fortune he was about to make by destroying this neighborhood. "Enjoy your drink, my love," I murmured, a cold smile touching my lips. "Because it is. It is going to be your last expensive bottle." I drove home in silence, the radio off. The anger that had heated my blood earlier had cooled into something far more dangerous clarity. I parked the old sedan in the garage, wiped my shoes carefully so as not to leave any mud from the old quarter, and went straight to the basement. This was my sanctuary. While Julian had his glass-walled office in the sky, I had this windowless room filled with steel filing cabinets. It smelled of dust and old ink. I turned on the single overhead bulb and walked to the cabinet marked HJ. My fingers danced over the tabs. Harbor Street, height restrictions, Heritage House. I pulled the thick, expandable folder from the drawer. It was heavy with the weight of a century. I spread the documents out on my work table. There were blueprints from 1910, inspection reports from the 50s, and then, at the very bottom, the original land deed. I scanned the yellowed paper, my heart rate quickening. The legal description of the lot was precise. Lot 4B, Sector 7. I knew it, I whispered, tracing the line with my finger. 10 years ago, when I bought the management rights to the old quarter trust for $5,000, Julian had laughed. He called it my little charity project. He thought I was just paying to keep the streetlights on in a dead neighborhood. He never bothered to read the full list of assets included in the trust. Heritage House was not just a random building. It was the crown jewel of the trust. The deed clearly stated that the land and any structures upon it were held in trust for public benefit and historical preservation. I pulled a law book from the shelf, flipping to the section on trust law and property rights. I found the clause I was looking for, the revocation of usage rights. If the property is utilized for private gain, residential exclusivity not aligned with preservation, or commercial exploitation without trust approval. I read aloud, my voice echoing in the quiet room. All rights of usage shall immediately revert to the trustee. I was the trustee. Julian had spent millions renovating a penthouse for his mistress on land that I controlled. He had done it secretly because he assumed the trust was defunct, a legal ghost. But ghosts have a way of haunting the living. I needed to be sure. I pulled out my burner phone, a precaution I had taken weeks ago, and dialed a number I had not called in years. Marcus, I said when the line picked up. Ilara. His voice was thick with sleep. It is 2 a.m. Is everything okay? I need you to look at something, I said, ignoring his question. I am emailing you a scan of a deed and a current usage report. I need to know if I am reading this right. I scanned the documents and hit send. 5 minutes of agonizing silence passed. I stared at the phone. My breath caught in my throat. Finally, it rang. Ilara. Marcus sounded wide awake now. Where did you get this? Is it valid? I asked. Valid, it is ironclad, Marcus said, his voice rising with excitement. If Julian has done what you say he has done, if he has renovated this for private use, he has violated the primary covenant of the trust. But it gets worse for him. If he used company funds to do it, and registered the utility bills under a shell company to hide it. He did, I interrupted. I checked the public utility records. The power is in the name of Sierra Concepts LLC. That is embezzlement and money laundering. Marcus said, Ilara, listen to me. You do not just have him by the tail. You have the guillotine blade hovering right over his neck. But there is a catch. There is always a catch, I said. You need proof of occupancy. Marcus explained. You need him to publicly admit that he controls that building. If we just sue him now, he will claim he didn't know, blame a contractor, or say squatters' rights. We need him to claim it. We need him to say, this is mine. In front of witnesses. I looked at the calendar on the wall. The groundbreaking ceremony for Thorn Plaza was in 2 weeks. I can do that, I said, a plan forming in my mind. I can make him claim it. I can make him proud of it. Be careful, Ilara. Marcus warned, his tone serious. Julian is dangerous when he is cornered. He won't be cornered, I replied softly. He will think he is being crowned. Julian came home 3 hours past midnight. The scent of sandalwood and expensive rose perfume clung to his jacket, masking the stale smell of whiskey. He did not apologize. He did not ask if I was awake. He simply walked into the kitchen where I sat with a cold cup of tea and slid a thick manila envelope across the marble island. It is done, Julian said, his voice devoid of any warmth. Read it. Sign it. Do not make this difficult. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. I did not need to act too much to simulate the shaking. The adrenaline coursing through my veins did that for me. I scanned the document. It was insulting. He was offering me a small 2-bedroom apartment in the industrial district and a monthly stipend that would barely cover groceries. He was keeping the mansion, the cars, the stocks, and the Thorn Plaza project. I looked up at him, forcing my eyes to fill with tears. I let my lower lip quiver. Julian, how can you? I stammered, clutching the edge of the counter. 15 years. I gave you 15 years of my life. We built this together. Julian laughed. It was a dry, cruel sound. He walked to the refrigerator and grabbed a bottle of water. He scoffed, turning to face me with a look of pure disdain. There is no we, Ilara. There is me, the visionary, and there is you, the librarian who got lucky. You are nothing without me. You are just a relic I have outgrown. Please, I begged, letting a tear roll down my cheek. I love you. Do not throw me away like trash. Stop the drama, he snapped. Sign the papers. You have 48 hours, or I will have my lawyers bury you in legal fees until you are living in a cardboard box. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, playing the part of the defeated wife perfectly. I will sign, I whispered, looking down at the floor. Julian relaxed his shoulders, victory already evident in his posture. Good, he said. I knew you would be reasonable. But I have one condition, I added softly. He narrowed his eyes. What I want? I want to stand beside you at the Thorn Plaza groundbreaking, I said, looking up at him with pleading eyes. My family. They were proud of me being Mrs. Thorn. I cannot let them see me cast aside in the papers the next day. Let me have one last moment of dignity. Let me pretend, just for 1 hour, that we are still a team. Then I will disappear. Julian studied my face. He was looking for a trap, but all he saw was a desperate woman clinging to a shred of social status. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick message, likely to Sierra. After a moment, he smirked. Fine, he said, sliding the phone back into his pocket. If it means you sign the divorce papers without a fight, you can have your little photo op. But do not speak unless spoken to. You are there as a prop. Ilara, nothing more. Thank you. Julian, I whispered. For the next 2 weeks, I played the role of the grieving wife. I stayed in my room. I wore sweatpants. But while Julian was out with Sierra, I was working. I gathered the utility bills for the Heritage House which I found in his discarded briefcase. They were addressed to Sierra Concepts Limited, but the service address was undeniably the building in the old quarter. I pulled security footage from a bakery across the street, using my old connection with the owner, Mrs. Higgins. The footage clearly showed Julian and Sierra entering and exiting the building at all hours of the night. I also prepared a package. It contained copies of the original zoning laws, Julian's fraudulent inspection reports, and the financial trails linking him to the shell companies. I put it in a plain envelope and mailed it to Marcus, who then forwarded it anonymously to the city's most aggressive investigative journalist. The night before the ceremony, Julian was staying at a hotel near the site, claiming he needed to be close to the action. I knew he was actually with Sierra in their secret nest. I waited until I saw them leave for a celebratory dinner at 8 o'clock in the evening. I drove to the old quarter. The street was empty. I walked up to the heavy oak door of the Heritage House. Julian had changed the digital lock, of course, but he had not changed the physical deadbolt that secured the frame, likely because he did not want to draw attention to the exterior. As the trustee of the Old Quarter Trust, I held the master skeleton key for every heritage site in the district. I slid the heavy iron key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click. I stepped inside. The contrast was jarring. The lobby was filled with dust and debris to maintain the illusion of decay, but as I climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, the dust vanished. I opened the door to the penthouse. It was breathtaking. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. It was a palace built on lies. I took out my high-resolution camera. Beautiful, I whispered to the empty room. Truly beautiful. I recorded everything. I zoomed in on the framed photos of Julian and Sierra on the mantel. I opened the drawers and filmed the architectural plans stamped with confidential. I filmed the expensive wine collection. I filmed the deed to the property sitting arrogantly on his desk, waiting to be filed once the demolition was approved. I had undeniable proof. Julian was living like a king in a building he swore was a death trap. I locked the door behind me and walked out into the cool night air. My hands were steady. My tears were gone. Tomorrow, I would not be the grieving wife. Tomorrow, I would be the executioner. The memory of that night flashed through my mind in a split second, grounding me back in the present moment. The silence that followed my question on the podium was heavier than the concrete slabs being poured nearby. Julian took a stiff step toward me, his face draining of the confident tan he had sprayed on that morning. He looked at the index cards in his hand, then at me. He realized I was not holding the speech he had written. "Ilara, stick to the script," he hissed, his voice low enough that only the microphone picked up a jagged distortion of it. Do not embarrass me." I ignored him. I turned my back to him and pointed a steady finger at the crumbling brick facade of the building looming behind the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice echoing across the plaza. "Behind us stands the Heritage House. In his application to the city council, my husband described this structure as a rotting carcass. He claimed the foundation was liquid and the roof was collapsing. He swore under oath that it was uninhabitable." The crowd murmured. Reporters began to scribble furiously. Julian dropped his facade entirely. He lunged toward me, his hand outstretched to grab the microphone. "Cut the sound," he screamed at the technicians. She is having a mental breakdown. Get her off the stage." But before his hand could touch my arm, a heavy hand clamped onto his shoulder. Marcus stepped out from the shadows of the stage wings. He was not just my lawyer today, he was my shield. 2 burly security guards, hired privately by Marcus earlier that morning, stepped in front of Julian, forming a human wall between him and me. "Let me finish. Julian," I said, my voice cold and calm. "You see, my husband loves history so much that he did not actually want to demolish the Heritage House. He wanted to keep it, specifically, the 4th floor. I pressed the small clicker concealed in my palm. Behind me, the massive LED screen that was supposed to display the architectural renderings of the new mall flickered. The logo of the Thorn Group vanished. In its place, a high-definition video began to play. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. On the screen, the camera panned across the gleaming Italian marble floors of the hidden penthouse. It zoomed in on the bottle of vintage champagne sitting on the table. It showed the custom velvet sofas and the king-sized bed covered in silk sheets. And then, the frame froze on a framed photograph on the nightstand Julian and Sierra, kissing on a yacht in the Mediterranean. Sierra, who had been sitting smugly in the front row, stood up so fast her chair fell backward with a loud clatter. Her face was a mask of sheer terror. She looked around for an exit, but the press pit had already turned their lenses toward her like a pack of hungry wolves. "This is the uninhabitable ruin my husband spoke of," I narrated over the gasps of the crowd. "A $2 million renovation funded by the shareholders of Thorn Group, hidden under the guise of structural stabilization costs." "Lies," Julian roared, struggling against the grip of the security guards. "That footage is fake. It is AI generated. You are crazy, is the deed fake too?" Julian, I asked, holding up the yellowing document I had retrieved from the basement. I looked directly into the camera lens, addressing the live stream. "This entire block sits on land owned by the Old Quarter Trust," I declared. "For 15 years, the Thorn Group has held a lease on this land, but there is a clause in the original charter, the misuse of property clause." I took a breath. This was the kill shot. It states that if any part of the heritage land is used for private residential luxury or undisclosed commercial gain without the express written permission of the trustee, the lease is immediately null and void, I said. The rights to the land, the buildings, and everything constructed upon them revert instantly to the trust. Julian stopped struggling. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrific realization. He knew the clause. He just thought the trust was a dead entity with no one to enforce it. "And who is the trustee?" Julian whispered, his voice trembling so much the microphone barely caught it. Who did you sell it to?" I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had worn in years. "I did not sell it, Julian," I said softly. "I bought the management rights 10 years ago for $5,000. I am the Old Quarter Trust." I dropped the heavy file onto the podium with a thud. "So, get off my property," I said, "and take your mistress with you." The reaction was instantaneous. The polite applause of the Silver Bay elite evaporated, replaced by a low, angry rumble that quickly escalated into shouting. The investors, men and women who had entrusted Julian with millions of dollars based on his reputation for stability, were suddenly on their feet. They were not looking at the architectural renderings anymore. They were looking at the live footage of the champagne bottle and the silk sheets that their money had purchased. "Where is our money?" Thorne, a man in the third row, screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. You said the funds were for structural reinforcement." Julian looked like an animal caught in a trap. He was sweating profusely, his perfectly styled hair now sticking to his forehead. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his eyes wide with a manic desperation. She is lying," Julian shrieked, his voice cracking under the strain. "That document is a forgery. She is crazy. She has been off her medication for months." He lunged toward me again, his hands curled into claws. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to silence the voice that was tearing his empire apart, but the security guards were faster. They slammed him back against the scaffolding of the stage. "Get off me!" Julian roared, thrashing against their grip. "I am Julian Thorne. I own this city. You can't touch me." To his left, Sierra was trying to make herself invisible. She grabbed her purse and turned to run toward the VIP exit, but the press pit had smelled blood. They swarmed her, blocking her path with a wall of flashing cameras and microphones. "Ms. Sierra, did you know the apartment was illegal?" a reporter shouted. Sierra's composure shattered. She looked at the cameras, then at Julian, and made a calculated decision. She pointed a manicured finger at her lover. "I did not know," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face with impressive speed. "He lied to me. He told me it was his private property. I am a victim here. He used me just like he used everyone else." Before she could spin her narrative further, a tall woman in a trench coat stepped forward from the press line. It was the investigative journalist I had sent the files to. She did not look sympathetic. "If you are a victim, Ms. Sierra," the journalist asked, her voice cutting through the noise, "can you explain the $300,000 transferred to Sierra Concepts LLC last month from the Thorne Group's construction fund? We have the bank records." Sierra went pale. She stammered, but no words came out. I stood on the podium, watching the chaos unfold with a strange sense of detachment. I did not feel triumphant. I felt a cold, clinical satisfaction. It was like watching a controlled demolition. I had planted the charges, and now gravity was doing the rest. Then came the sirens. They wailed in the distance, growing louder with every second, cutting through the shouts of the angry mob. 2 black SUVs screeched to a halt at the edge of the plaza. Officers in windbreakers marked Economic Crimes Unit stepped out. Beside them was a representative from the district attorney's office. Marcus had timed this perfectly. The lead officer walked onto the stage, holding a folded piece of paper. "Julian Thorne," the officer said, his voice calm and authoritative. "We have a warrant for the immediate search of the premises known as the Heritage House, and a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of embezzlement, fraud, and grand larceny." Julian stopped fighting the guards. He slumped, his legs giving way as the reality of the situation hit him with the force of a wrecking ball. He looked up at the fourth-floor window of the Heritage House. The light was still on in the penthouse. He had spent so much time building that apartment as his escape, his paradise away from his boring wife. Now, the police were going to walk up those stairs and find every shred of evidence they needed to put him away for 20 years. His sanctuary was his cell. The officer pulled Julian's arms behind his back and clicked the handcuffs into place. The sound was sharp and final. I stepped down from the podium. I left the microphone behind. The crowd parted for me, their anger momentarily silenced by the sight of the woman who had brought down the king. I walked slowly toward where the police were holding Julian. He looked up at me. His eyes were red, filled with a mix of hatred and confusion. He still did not understand how the woman who organized his socks could have orchestrated his destruction. I leaned in close, so close I could smell the fear radiating off him. He choked out, his voice a broken whisper. Why did you? I cut him off. I told you, Julian, I whispered, my voice soft but hard as diamond. You are just the builder. You lay the bricks, but I am the one who holds the land, and I just evicted you. The fallout was swift, violent, and utterly satisfying. In the 48 hours following the arrest, the stock price of the Thorn Group plummeted by 60%. The board of directors, desperate to save their own skins, issued a public statement distancing themselves from Julian, but it was too late. I had already sent the second batch of files to the district attorney. These files contained the original zoning records for 5 other major projects Julian had built over the last decade. In the past, I had used my skills to help him navigate those regulations. Now, I provided the prosecutors with a roadmap of every shortcut he had taken, every safety inspection he had bribed his way through, and every historical easement he had ignored. Sierra lasted less than 24 hours in custody before she broke. Faced with charges of money laundering and conspiracy to commit fraud, the concept of true love evaporated instantly. My source in the police department told me that she was screaming for a plea deal before the ink on her fingerprints was dry. He told me it was legal. She reportedly sobbed to the detectives, her mascara running down her face. Julian forced me to sign those papers. I was just an employee. I am a victim. She gave them everything. She handed over the passwords to the offshore accounts, the emails where Julian discussed bribing city officials, and the text messages where he mocked the shareholders. Their romantic tragedy ended not with a kiss, but with a signed confession in a cold interrogation room. Julian was denied bail. The judge deemed him a high flight risk given the offshore accounts Sierra had exposed. His assets were frozen immediately. The banks that had once courted him with expensive lunches were now filing foreclosure notices on his properties. Then came the divorce proceedings. Julian's lawyer, a sweaty man who clearly knew he was not getting paid, tried to argue that the prenuptial agreement limited my settlement to the small apartment. Marcus sat across the table, calm and smiling. He slid a copy of the prenup toward them, opened to the appendix. "You are correct about the standard division of assets," Marcus said smoothly. "However, you seemed to have missed the full disclosure clause on page 42. It states that if either party is found to have willfully concealed assets exceeding $100,000, the agreement is voidable at the discretion of the injured party. The hidden penthouse, the funds in Sierra Concepts, that is concealment." I leaned forward. "I am voiding the prenup. Julian," I said to the empty chair where he should have been, "I am taking half of what is left, and since you owe millions in fines, half of what is left is basically the rest of your clean assets. I won. I took the liquid cash, the clean stocks, and most importantly, the controlling interest in the Thorn Plaza project. I wasted no time. I issued an executive order to halt construction immediately. The steel skeleton of the shopping mall was dismantled. In its place, I commissioned a new design. We would not build a monument to consumerism. We would build the Silver Bay Heritage Park and Cultural Center. The Heritage House would be the centerpiece, fully restored and open to the public, just as the trust intended. 2 weeks later, I went to see him. The visitor room at the county jail smelled of bleach and despair. Julian sat behind the plexiglass partition. He looked 20 years older. His hair was gray and unkempt. His orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame, and the arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, shaking fear. He picked up the phone receiver. His hand trembled. "Ilara." He rasped, his voice cracking. "Ilara, you have to help me. I can't survive in here. Please, talk to the judge. Tell them I was under stress. Tell them we can work this out." I looked at him. I felt nothing. No hate. No love. Just the indifference one feels when looking at a bug trapped in a jar. I did not pick up the phone. Instead, I slid a heavy, hard-bound book through the document slot at the bottom of the partition. He looked at it confused. It was a copy of the History of Silver Bay Foundations and Failures. I leaned into the microphone on my side of the glass. "Read it," I said simply. What he mouthed, looking at the book. "Read it," I repeated. Chapter 4 mentions the man who tried to build on the old quarter marshlands in 1900 without checking the soil composition. His house sank. You ignored the past. Julian, you thought you were bigger than the history of this city. Read the book, so you understand exactly why you failed. I stood up. "Ilara." "Wait," he screamed, slamming his hand against the glass. "Do not leave me, Ilara." I turned and walked away. The sound of his desperate pounding on the glass faded as the heavy steel door clanged shut behind me. The next morning, I sold my controlling shares in the Thorn Group to Julian's biggest rival for $40 million. I took that money and established the Vance Foundation for Historical Preservation. I had cleared the rot from the city. Now, it was time to rebuild. It has been 6 months since the scandal broke. The morning air in Silver Bay was crisp and smelled of salt and new beginnings. I stood on the cobblestones of the old quarter, looking up at the Heritage House. It no longer looked like a rotting carcass or a secret palace of sin. The graffiti was scrubbed away, the brickwork was repointed, and the heavy oak doors were wide open to the morning sun. A brass plaque next to the entrance read, "The Vance Community Library and Historical Archive." I was no longer the invisible wife of Julian Thorne. I was Ilara Vance, the woman who saved the history of this city from being paved over by greed. People walked past me and smiled. They did not pity me. They respected me. I took a deep breath. I thought back to that night outside this very building. I remembered the rage that had threatened to consume me when I saw Julian and Sierra kissing in the window. Most women would have stormed the door. They would have screamed and thrown rocks and made a scene that Julian could have easily dismissed as hysteria. But I did not. I realized then that silence is not weakness. Silence is a strategy. My silence that night bought my freedom. It allowed me to gather the ammunition I needed not just to wound him, but to bury him. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text message from Marcus. The judge just read the sentence. 15 years. No parole for at least 10. It is over. Ilara. I stared at the screen. 15 years. Julian would sit in a concrete cell until his hair turned completely white. He would have nothing but time to think about the librarian he thought he could outsmart. I walked to the edge of the pier, which was just a few hundred feet from the library entrance. The ocean was calm. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the platinum diamond ring that Julian had placed on my finger 15 years ago. He had chosen it not because I liked it, but because it was the biggest one in the store. It was a symbol of his ownership, not his love. I held it over the dark water. The diamond caught the sunlight one last time. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. I felt light. Goodbye. Julian, I whispered to the waves. I hope the history books are kind to you, because I won't be. I opened my fingers. The ring fell. It hit the water with a quiet splash and vanished instantly into the deep. It was just a piece of metal now, returning to the earth, just like his empire. I turned my back on the ocean and walked into my library. The smell of old paper and leather bindings greeted me like an old friend. I walked past the rows of restored maps and the display cases filled with city artifacts. I sat at my desk, the place where I belonged. I was the keeper of stories. I was the guardian of the past. And now, finally, I was the architect of my own future. I looked up, staring directly into the lens of the camera, breaking the silence one last time. Do not ever underestimate the woman who holds your past, I said, my voice steady and cold, because if you are not careful, she will delete your future. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment down below and share your thoughts on Julian's fate. If you believe in karma and justice, please make sure to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people. See you in the next chapter.